Om Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti Om. Namaste. So the four of us, place Sylvia here next to me, and we still have a group. And we begin today with our Drg Drsya-Viveka. And unless we have any questions or we have any answers from any of you, no answers?
I just wanted to thank you last, was it Panchadasi, I think, where you answered a question and pointed me back toward discrimination as the seat of dispassion. And it's been very helpful.
Nice.
Thank you.
Most welcome. So good to have the three of you. So we carry on. So we go back to Drg Drsya, Claudio. Okay, we all back on the page. Oh, there are no pages here. We are somewhere there, page 16. We unfold the verse 8, number 8, page 16. There is a paragraph from where we begin today. First, the author was explaining those two aspects of the mind. One aspect is subtle matter, is the substantial nature of the mind. The other aspect, it says we know, is the thought, the sentience aspect of the mind. So we know that the mind is inert, it's a kind of reflecting medium made out of subtle energy, but yet it is matter, subtle matter. And then we think that the contact of all pervasive consciousness with the subtle body, which is this very subtle matter, this reflection or this brightness or this shininess, of sentience that manifests in the case of the human jiva with the thought, aṃśam, I am, I exist. So the I am thought, I exist thought is the sentient aspect of the mind, okay? It's something that happens as a reflection of consciousness within the subtle body, which is subtle matter. Those are the two aspects. And then now the author introduced another aspect of the mind. After introducing these two parts of the mind, the author introduced another subtle point. He said that the mind is associated with three things intimately. The subtle, invisible substance mind is intimately associated with the physical body. And the very life of the physical body is dependent on the mind, okay? So we know that the mind is associated with consciousness, and then it's associated with reflecting medium, and then we have the mind, and this mind, this intelligent design mind, is associated with the physical body, and then it makes the physical body alive, makes the physical body intelligently responding, or even keeping itself, through the vital airs, the intelligently designed airs, the pranamaya. So the very life of the body depends on this mind. Okay, in the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna refers to this aspect of the mind, saying that when the one who rules the body departs, he draws to himself the five senses and the mind, the six obtaining in the body. Okay, so it's mentioned here and there in most of all our texts, the fact that the subtle body, we often say the subtle body, but we know subtle body is just insentient, but the mind, which has its substantial nature as the subtle body, the mind itself, with its substantial nature, with its thought nature or sentient nature, is what vivifies the physical body. And at the time of the death, the mind quits the physical body. The mind is not seen quitting, but when the residing mind is also not seen, because the mind is subtle in nature. The mind is associated with reflected consciousness, the cidābhāsa. Cidābhāsa, like a mirror, is associated with a reflected object. Again, here it's very difficult to draw a line between the subtle body, which is the reflecting medium, and then RC, which is reflected consciousness, which is subtle body. Subtle body, the cidābhāsa, the reflect consciousness. This reflect consciousness depends on the mirror, depends on the subtle body. Therefore, it is intimately associated with the subtle body. And then we have this phenomenon called sentience, or I am, I exist. Now, it's called the cidābhāsa, which is a conscious being, okay, which is associated to the mirror, with the reflect, like the mirror and the reflect object. Just a second, please, because I have to change the setting here because my screen is going off. Because I took it from, no, I don't need to do that. I just need to hook it with the power, and then this stops. Okay, so far so good. Any question about this? We have the two aspects of the mind. The mind has its mirror-like apparatus, which is made out of matter. It by itself, it's not sentient, but then something happens because consciousness, being all pervasive, it pervades the subtle body, this mirror-like substance, and then produce this phenomenon called the ahamkara, the thought, I am, I exist, and I know that I am, I know that I exist. And then what is of this ahamkara without the body? Without the body, it is exactly like the ahamkara in the state of dream state. Why? In the dream state, we have the ahamkara that cannot no longer be said to be the ahamkara of the awakened state, because it does not have the body, it does not use the physical body, it uses only the subtle body, and then it's going to experience its own contents, its own mental, emotional contents, okay? So what is of this mind without the physical body? It's only good for dreaming, basically, or to spend some time in one of these lokas once it detaches from the physical body once for all, remains deprived of having an instrument of transaction, an instrument to transact in the vyavaharika, so that it can carry on processing vasanas and extracting knowledge, understanding, and growth. So this body is another intrinsic part of the mind, without which, the body and the instruments of action and perception, the mind is just something like we experience in the dream state. You understand? It's there, but it's no longer a real ahamkara. At the time of death, the mind quits the physical body. The mind is not seen quitting, but then the residing mind is also not seen, because the mind is subtle by nature. So nobody sees the mind. I don't see the mind of Claudio, for example. But I know that there is a mind there. We know by inference. If the mind is not there, the body it's expressless, it becomes a dead body, which is different from a deep sleeping body. A deep sleeping body still has prana taking care of everything, but a dead body is a dead body. So we know that the mind of Claudio is there with him, but nobody sees it because it's subtle. Okay, it's extremely subtle. The subtle body is already substance, which is already matter, is invisible. What to say of the reflection that occurs in this subtle body? No, it's even more subtle. The mind is associated with reflect consciousness, the cidābhāsa, like a mirror is associated with the reflected objects. This is the analogy for us to understand the relationship between the cidābhāsa, the reflected consciousness, and the subtle body. Is the same relationship of an object, meaning to say, I, in the morning when I see myself in the mirror. So what is the relationship between the image in the mirror and the mirror? They are so intimately associated, that you cannot separate them. So the reflection depends on the mirror, of course. The mirror does not depend on the reflection. We need to remember that. So in a way, so the cidābhāsa depends on the subtle body, as we know, and furthermore, it depends on the physical body. And here we're going to look into it more, I hope, more in details. The mind and the body are intimately connected. The mind and the reflect consciousness are also intimately connected. The mind and the original consciousness are also intimately connected. So that's why we see in these teachings of Drg Drsya, what is a human being? What is Claudio? Claudio is original limitless consciousness, which is equal to every expression of consciousness. Doesn't matter the reflecting medium, doesn't matter the configuration of every three body, the body-mind complex. Consciousness is one and the same. Okay, so what is Claudio? Claudio is consciousness, and then but this consciousness is very intimately connected with the subtle body, and then it's going to produce reflected consciousness, cidābhāsa. This cidābhāsa is very intimately related to consciousness and the reflecting medium. And then yet Claudio is not there unless the physical body is there for him to turn him into an effective jiva, cidābhāsa, or individual agent, experiencing, knowing agent. And then we have all these interconnections, these associations, intimate association, that makes what we usually call the body-mind complex. The body-mind complex is a mixture of all these different seers, different illuminators that appear, which are fundamentally illumined by consciousness, the absolute seer, the absolute illuminator. This is another teaching to see in which way a jiva is made out of parts, but seen a little slightly differently. So we end up having three pairs. We have a mind body. Okay, we have the mind and the physical body. And then we have the mind and the reflected consciousness, meaning to say that here it's easier, we replace this word mind with the word subtle body, not to make much confusion, to keep it simple. We have three pairs, subtle body and physical body, okay? We know that the subtle body is going to permeate the physical body, and then is going to activate and animate and keep it functioning. So we have three pairs. We have the subtle body and the physical body, and then we have the subtle body and the reflected consciousness. We have the subtle body, the reflecting medium, and then the reflection, the mirror, and the image that occurs within the mirror. And then we have another pair, which is subtle body and original consciousness, okay? So now we have OC, original consciousness, and we have the subtle body, the mind, okay? And then once we have the mind, we can look at the mind and we say, okay, the mind has also an intimate relationship with something which is a reflection that occurs within the subtle body, okay? Then we have the subtle body and the reflection. And then in the end, we say, okay, now we have this beautiful ahamkara, this beautiful reflection, but it needs to have an instrument for knowledge experience. And then we say the subtle body of the mind and the physical body, three pairs is presented here. These three pairs are crowded together in an individual. This crowded, it means to say is mixed together, is to be lumped together. Did you hear me? Okay. So they are crowded together in an individual. Weird, strange word. The questions that are asked about the three pairs are, what type of intimate is present in these associations, in these intimate connections, What is the relationship? How intimate it is, each one of these associations? What is the relationship between them? And how strong is the bonding of these three pairs? We are talking about the connection between the subtle body and original consciousness, the connection between the subtle body and reflected consciousness, and the connection of the subtle body and the physical body, okay? So those are the questions presented by I think it was Swami Paramarthananda. The mind material, okay, this is the subtle body, the substantial aspect of the mind, okay? The material aspect of the mind has intimate association with reflected consciousness, of course. So we have the subtle body, which is very intimate associated with reflect consciousness. It has also very intimate relationship with the physical body, because it produces the reflect consciousness, and this reflected consciousness is the one which is going to vivify and animate the physical body. And we have original consciousness, sākṣī. So these are all the three aspects that we want to understand the relationship and how tied together they are, and in which way they transfer their principle, their nature to the next thing, It's what we're going to try to see. I'm curious to see how he's going to explain such a phenomenon. Let's see. Any reflecting medium, the relation, no, where am I? What time is it? The mind material, okay. Any reflecting medium, the mirror, and the reflection cannot be physically separated. Sure, absolutely, you cannot separate them. As long as the reflecting medium is present, some sort of reflection will also be present, okay? So in the case of consciousness and the reflecting mediums, the subtle bodies, we know that there will always be reflections because consciousness is everywhere. It's all pervasive. And then every time there is a subtle body in the universe, you understand? And then there is no other way. Wherever there is consciousness, and consciousness is everywhere. Wherever there is a subtle body, and then consciousness is going to pervade it, and we will have this reflected consciousness, the RC, reflected consciousness. So it is present for as long as there is a subtle body. Consciousness is going to appear to be reflected in the subtle body. Therefore, the subtle body will be eternally connected with the cidābhāsa, definitely. So wherever there is consciousness that is all the time present, never not present. Wherever there is the reflecting medium, there will be a cidābhāsa, a reflect consciousness. Therefore, the subtle body will be eternally connected with a cidābhāsa. Wherever there is a subtle body, wherever there is the substantial nature of the mind, which is made out of subtle matter, whenever there is it, there will be a cidābhāsa. And then the cidābhāsa and the subtle body, they exist eternally, okay? Eternally connected. Whenever there is one, there is the second one, okay? And wherever there is a reflection, we must be sure that there will be a reflecting medium. Whenever there is a reflecting medium, there will be a sort of consciousness reflected in it. And that goes to the insect life and so on. There is no time when the subtle body is alone, is present without its reflection. There is no time when the mind, the subtle body, is there present, but without a cidābhāsa, a reflected entity, right? So that's why people get confused and think that the mind has intrinsic consciousness. So it's very easy to get mixed up. We think that the mind, it has its own sentience. Why? Because wherever there is a subtle body, there is a mind, there is intelligence, there is a sentience. Okay, so it's so closely, eternally, intimately connected at all times that people get confused and they believe that the mind has its own sentience, it has its own intrinsic consciousness. Okay, so we say no, it is Jesus consciousness. You understand? I am, I exist. This is consciousness. No, this is not consciousness. This is the I thought associated with the idam thoughts. Okay, and this depends on what? Depends on the substantial nature of the mind, the subtle body, which depends on consciousness alone. So consciousness plus the subtle body produce the cidābhāsa, and the cidābhāsa is nothing but I am, I exist, and all thoughts in relation to everything that appears in my environment. All the thoughts in my mental environment, my physical environment is going to get together and create the ego, the aḥamkara, the thoughts and notions and ideas and feelings and so on that I have in respect to my existence as I am and in relationship with the world, through the physical body, of course. That's why it's confusing. When the borrowed consciousness is permanently present, when the borrowed consciousness is permanently present, it appears as intrinsic. You remember that we said that consciousness is always ever present, never not present. And then, so you happen to be born, and then whether you know it or not, you have a subtle body, you have a substantial aspect, a substantial mind. And then when the mind is there, consciousness is all the time there. And then the next thought that people have is, okay, if every time I am existing as a person, as a aḥamkara, as an ego, consciousness is with me, it means that consciousness may be inherent to what I am as consciousness. I have my own source of consciousness and it's mine. So that's all the confusion between the aḥamkara and consciousness, the mind as if it has its intrinsic consciousness, okay? When the borrowed consciousness is permanent present, it appears as it belongs to the subtle body, because it all the time present with the subtle body. Oh, no, it belongs to the subtle body. The subtle body has its own consciousness, and then we go through the entire confusion that we find in the spiritual world of people confusing the mind with consciousness. When the mind resolves in the deep sleep state, the mind still exists in potential form, and it's easy to understand that the mind was not killed because the mind comes back. And then we say, oh no, I was just resting, I was just sleeping, but the mind was not destroyed. We did not lose our existence, our sentience. At the time of Vidāntic, Vidāntic is the concept of the Jivan Mukta, the Jiva with self-knowledge, and he's leaving the body, and he's leaving the body without desire to be back, or desire for continuation, desire for more. I need to experience more. There is so much more I want to experience. So this is the concept of Vidāntic. Is the one that was liberated while alive, and then the body somehow gets too old, and then the soul leaves this body, and leaves the body not to come back, not to ask Ishvara for another instrument of experience. It says here that at the time of Vidāntic, when the Jiva Mukta leaves the body, when the mind gets destroyed permanently. So that's when the mind gets destroyed permanently. The mind, it becomes suppressed, let's say, or suspended during the deep sleep state, and then the individual did not understood who he or she is. And then it goes into another longer period of sleep between one incarnation and another incarnation. And then in that period of time, the mind was not destroyed. The mind became well and alive and crying, and really wanting more experience. Okay. So, but it's not the case with the Jivan Mukta leaving the body. And then he moves into the Vidāntic status, because it's not an entity, it's just dissolves. The mind dissolves. The mind gets permanently dissolved or destroyed. Now the reflect consciousness gets destroyed. So now we have the situation in which the reflecting medium and the reflect consciousness, they are just dissolved. Because it is fundamentally the reflected consciousness that holds all the desires and aversions. You understand? And it is this Jiva Atma, this reflect consciousness, that is going to ask Ishvara to produce another 3 bodies, another body-mind complex, another reflecting medium, another subtle body, so that it can come back and carry on its business, unfinished business. But the reflected consciousness and the reflecting medium both gets dissolved. They are so intimately connected. When this reflected consciousness obtains this knowledge and holds to this knowledge, and this knowledge is clear. And then in the last moment when he leaves the body, he just says, oh, thank you, but unless you find that I need to come back for exhausting some punya papa, I prefer not. And then the mind gets dissolved. So it means to say the Jiva Atma, which is sought, its sentient aspect, it's going to be free from desires, free from aversions, and then he's no longer going to need its subtle body and the physical body, those close, intimate association, to become again an experiencing entity, wishing to go through the process of experiencing or processing karma, vasanas, howsoever we want to look at it. Okay, let's see where it goes here. So the reflecting consciousness and the reflecting medium gets dissolved. Thus the mind, the subtle body and the reflect consciousness has inseparable permanent relationship. Okay, done deal. Okay, subtle body and reflect consciousness, they exist together. Okay, and since the reflected subtle body, which is insentient, and the reflect consciousness, which is sentient, it's only the sentient aspect of the jiva that can put an end to samsara. Okay, can claim and say no more, and then because the subtle body is inert matter. Okay, that's what I say. It is the reflecting consciousness, the RC, that is going to keep asking Ishvara for another round, another round, another round. That is the intelligent, sentient, thought aspect of the Jivatma. The body, the physical body and the subtle body relationship is never inseparable. The physical body and the subtle body relationship is never apart, inseparable, or permanent. It's never inseparable, it's never permanent. So the physical body and the subtle body relationship is something that it's impermanent. It could be easier to say it's impermanent. It's not all of the time there. Why? Because the body dies at a certain point. As we know, anything that is born, it grows and it dies. No? Therefore, that shows that the subtle body separates from the physical body. It's very clear knowledge, very clear logic. It shows that if the body goes and there is something that remains, okay? There is something that remains during the night, in deep sleep, during a coma, or anesthetics, or in many other instances, you know, it also remains between two births, okay? So there is this relationship between the subtle body and the physical body, the mind, in its both aspects, the substantial and the thought aspect. This mind and the physical body, they don't exist all the time because the body is born and the body dies, okay? It is an instrument custom designed to the individual soul to process their own karma, their own vasanas, according to their punya papas, of course. If the relationship was permanent between the physical body and the subtle body, what would happen to Cloud? He would never die. Why? Because no, it's likewise, you know, like the subtle body and the reflect consciousness, they are all the time together. The physical body and the subtle body are all the time together. No. If that was the case, and then we would never die. And we know that that's not the case. The physical body dies. We do not die, of course. And the subtle body is almost eternal as well. It needs to somehow kills itself because if it does not die a natural death, as we are dead, okay? The physical body dies a natural death. The subtle body or the mind does not die a natural death. We need to kill the mind. And it's very strange. And this is a concept that scares people. But it's not as it sounds, you know, it's somehow the mind gets wise and says, okay, I have learned my lessons here. I just want to rest now. I want to rest in consciousness, in Brahman as Brahman. So, but instead, no, we do not live forever. The body and the mind have association and dissociation, and it's important to understand that association and dissociation, the mind is more or less the same, although the mind, like everything in nature, is a continuous flux of change. but there is a continuity between of the mind. The mind leaves the body and comes back, and its contents are more or less the same. It's the journey of the soul. Yeah? But the physical body, it's just built again, and it's built again in function. It's a function of the environment, time, space, circumstance, plus my punya papa, my vasanas. Yeah? And then there are certain elements. So it dissociates from the body and then associates with a fresh new body in a different time, space, designed so that I can take the best possible advantage of this school chamado life. If the relationship is permanent, the body will never die. The body and the mind have association. This association is what we call death of the body. And association is what we call the birth, or rebirth. Rebirth. And everybody celebrates when the association happens between the subtle body and the physical body. People, hey, beautiful, hey, one more round. And then when people are just about dying, and then the dissociation between the mind and the body is about to happen, people get really sad and cry and upset, and they don't understand. They don't understand that it's just a symbol, a cycle of association, dissociation of the same soul. But we understand ignorance does so that the people around a dead body or a dead entity or a dead body, physical body, has developed certain attachments to that configuration of the elements. And besides, every time we see a dead body, we see our body dying. It reminds us that the body, is going to die, and the same is going to happen to this body here. So, and then people do not celebrate that. And this is something interesting, because when we were with Osho Rajneesh, when I was a young man, he used to say that we have to celebrate that as well. So whenever people would die there will be a big party and celebration and so on, because you see, so it's a natural cycle, now natural flow of life. Yes, Lynn.
That reminds me of when I was in my 20s, 30s maybe, and my father passed away, and I went back, lived from California to New York to attend the funeral, and I got so blissed out. I had to leave because my behavior was so out there. And I didn't understand it then, I didn't get it, but sort of shocked at my own behavior, though it didn't become behavior. It was just some internal blessing. It was lovely, lovely to celebrate. So I really appreciate that cultural sensitivity to what's going on there. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Can be very, very nice. Good experience. When Osho Rajneesh left his body in 1990 or 1991, I don't remember. And the whole ashram, there were thousands of people there at the time. Everybody was blissed out, and we couldn't understand what was going on, but everybody was blissed out, strangely enough. Dissociation is death, association is rebirth. Krishna refers to this association in the Bhagavad Gita. And it says, just as a person gives up old clothes and takes up new ones, so does the self. Now he presents the subtle body as the self, okay? The subtle body is eternal, but it can be killed. Does not die a natural death. It can be dissolved or killed by self-knowledge. And here he presents the self. It could be the subtle body. Just as a person gives up old clothes and takes up new ones, so does the subtle body or the indweller. In Gita, it presents as the indweller. The indweller is consciousness or is the subtle body? It's both. As we know, consciousness is the one pervading and vivifying the subtle body so that the subtle body can vibrate within the physical body and then vivify the physical body, okay? So it is who is the indweller? It's consciousness plus the subtle body is the indweller of the physical body. Yeah? So a person gives up old clothes, takes up a new one. So the indweller, let's say, is the one who dwells in the body, gives up old bodies and takes other new bodies, every time that the old body no longer, exhausts its karma, let's say. The mind drops one body and takes another body and lives for some time and then drops that body again. And the cycle goes on forever, but not really forever. The mind-body relationship, the subtle body, physical body relationship is temporary, as we have determined. What principle calls this association and what principle calls this dissociation? This is the key question. What brings this subtle body again in relationship with the physical body, and what is going to separate the subtle body from the physical body? And we know very well there is an intelligent supreme power. We call it Ishvara, and it has its tools to extract the subtle body. One of the pranas has the power to eject not only unwanted substance within the body, but ejects the subtle body from the physical body. And that's so because a lot of the time the subtle body, the soul, gets so attached to the old body that it does not want to go so easily. But we hear stories that there are some yogis or even some Buddhist yogis, let's say that have the power to deliberately ejects the subtle body from the physical body. They make nice ceremonies. The guy says, "No, I have no attachments here, and I am done. I am young. It's okay, but tomorrow, now I have skilled. I got the skills to do this ejection, and tomorrow we do the ceremony, and then I'm going to get out of here." And then they get out. You understand? But generally speaking, we don't have that power. That power belongs to Ishvara, and Ishvara knows our timing. And when I saw these videos about these Buddhist monks doing that, I was saying, so how is Ishvara putting up with all of that? Because it should be a decision of Ishvara. But Ishvara somehow says, okay, no, I give you the permission. Now you develop the power. So whatever you do, it's my doing, because ultimately Ishvara is the real doer of everything. So let's see what the mind drops the body. It's a cycle that goes on. The mind, body, the subtle body, physical body is temporary. What is this principle? The association is caused by pravada karma. So now we present the principle that brings association, and dissociation is karma. And karma is nothing else but Ishvara. Ishvara represented by its laws. We know Ishvara is not only the efficient, intelligent cause, but it is the laws by which it sustains the universe, including the karmic laws that brings people into life and then pulls them, this dissociation of the soul with the physical body. So the association is caused by prarabdha karma, and this association will last until the prarabdha karma lasts. So this is again another touch subject, because Prarabdha karma, it's something that does not exhaust itself. Why it does not exhaust itself? Because we see people get rebirth again. They get reborn again. They get reborn. Why? Because there is karma. There are sanchitas, and the sanchitas, they are going to produce parabhadas. No? So this parabhada karma, it's said that it needs to be exhausted, but we know that at certain point, these parabhada karmas, they somehow they got exhausted to a certain extent. But furthermore, we see that the physical instrument usually is old, and it no longer serves its purpose as an equipment, an instrument of knowledge, experience to process vasanas, process karma. So, but then we have to say, but how about the children that die very early with a car accident and so on, And then again, the scripture says that it's parabhada karma, the parabhada karma of such a soul was to leave the body at the early age, you understand? And there is nothing problematic about that. But there are all kinds of scenarios that we don't need to look. We don't understand Ishvara in its complexity, the way this karma laws operate, but we know that nothing happens by accident. Everything is following this intelligent structure, intelligent order. That's what it means. The association with the physical body will last for as long as the parabhada needs that instrument to process. And then in the case of the Jiva Mukta, so it's said that there is only parabhada for the Jiva Mukta, meaning to say that even if he says, oh, no more, yet there is some results of previous agamas and sanchitas that they are exhausting. So there is parabhada, there isn't parabhada, fundamental, there isn't parabhada for the yoni as well, because the yoni does not own those things. There is no relationship possible between the subtle body and sākṣī. So now, what is the relationship between the mind? In this case, the relationship would be more accurate to say as the sentient aspect of the mind. So now we have the ahamkara and we have consciousness. There is no relationship possible between the ahamkara and consciousness, because consciousness is like space, which is not connected with anything, okay? So consciousness, it's the substratum, it pervades everything, but it is associationless. It does not associate with anything. Why? Because consciousness, although it serves as the background of mithya, it's not in the same order of mithya. Therefore, it does not associate, it does not dissociate, it's always ever present, but does not having any effect, Mithya does not have any contact with Satya, is the most mysterious thing. You understand? Consciousness is there as the substratum, but it belongs to another order, as if it is the background on which Mithya gets projected. And the best analogy is the screen on the cinema that receives all those dynamic pictures without ever being touched by what happens in that order of superimposition of colors and forms and so on. Okay, let me see here. Because sākṣī is like space and nothing, and is not connected to anything. The second reason why there is no relationship between consciousness and the mind is that consciousness belongs to the higher order of reality. I already covered that. Consciousness, it belongs to another order. It's the only real order. And then the mind belongs to the inferior secondary order. It's like to have the dreamer and the awaker. So what happens in the dream world does not affect the awaker. The awaker, when it wakes up from the dream, he does not need to feel like, oh my God, I did something terrible. Why? Because he knows that it was just a dream. He does not need to go to the police and say, hey, I was there and I stole a bank or something. He said, no, it's just a dream, it's just. So the same way, there is nothing to which, with which consciousness could associate, because consciousness is the most lonely, not lonely, alone thing. Consciousness is of the nature of aloneness, non-dual, and oneness. There is nothing but consciousness. So if there is something for consciousness to associate, and then consciousness is already being confused with the mind. The mind associates with many things, including it is changing mental states. But consciousness being one without a second of the nature of non-duality, it's impossible to associate with the mind. So consciousness is one thing, and the mind happens within the scope of consciousness without really associating with consciousness. Then can we say that the mind associates consciousness? No, it does not. The mind depends on consciousness, you understand? But does not associate really with consciousness. Let's say if he's going to touch this one. The mind belongs to a lower order of reality. No connection or bound is possible between the higher and the lower orders of reality. There is no connection, because they don't meet. It's so intriguing. Consciousness never meets with the mind. It never meets with this universe, you understand? Yet the universe depends on consciousness. And which way? Because consciousness is the one principle that somehow, using the power of Maya, creates, sustains, this reflection that occurs in consciousness, but it's happening there exactly like a movie, a projection that is just a mere appearance, like a mirage's appearance, like the story, the movie on the screen. It belongs to another order reality, and Satya never gets involved or affected, although Mithya depends on Satya. Satya never get entangled with Mithya. There is no connection, there is no boundary between Satya and Mithya, the higher and the lower order. A person in the waking state cannot get married in that state to someone that he comes across in the dream state. No relationship is possible between consciousness and the mind. But due to ignorance, we make the connection between consciousness, the original I, and the mind, the inferior I. I am sākṣī, I am consciousness, and I do not have connection with the mind, but I am worried about the mind and its conditions. And I say, I am disturbed, I am happy, I am jealous, I am emotional, okay? So this is due to the confusion between our higher nature as consciousness, pure, limitless, and our lower nature, appearance nature, better said, as the mind. And although the mind depends on consciousness, okay, the mind is not really connected with consciousness, because whenever there is a connection, there is an interaction in which both parts may affect and change one another. Understand? So that's the key. The mind cannot change consciousness. I hear again and again. The other day, somebody wrote me something about that, saying about the consciousness is growing, expanding, and so on. And no, there is no such a thing as consciousness. The mind grows, gets wiser, purifies, refines, and gets wiser and wiser. But consciousness not. If it was a connection, and then we would have to either bring the mind and throw the mind in satya and say, no, reality is duality. We have consciousness and the mind, and both are satya, right? Which brings us into big problem, because wherever there are two, there is change. Wherever there are two, there are change. So, and if we get consciousness and we throw consciousness in mithya, and we say, no, consciousness belongs to mithya, like the materialists say, that no, reality is what it is. It's matter, and matter is intelligent by itself, and there is no such a thing as satya or free independent principle, which is really conscious or self-conscious. No, matter itself becomes self-conscious in due time, which is another impossibility, because matter fundamentally is inert and cannot become self-conscious unless there is a self-conscious principle that somehow does not participate here in association with anything, but yet it lends sentience to all living creatures. Huh? Isn't it, Claudio? Okay. And then we got confused. The whole of Vedanta is about knowing that I do not have no mind. The self do not have. I do not have no mind. I do not have any connection. What is this? The whole Vedanta is about knowing that I do not have no mind, and that I do not have any connection with the mind. So the I consciousness do not have mind or no mind. Maybe, is that what it says?
I think it's just trying to say that I have no mind, and it's just a strange construction.
Yeah, I have no mind. So that makes more sense. Vedanta is this understanding that the I has no mind, let's say, okay? And this I have no connections with any mind. You understand? The mind exists, yes, it does exist, but it's not the real self. Huh? And the real self has no connection or association with the mind. Therefore, the conditions of the mind cannot make me a samsari. It means to say the conditions of the mind is not going to bind me into my mental conditions and identification and attachment to these mental conditions, or trying to control my mental condition. This is samsara. Samsara is just believing in phenomenon, believing in duality, believing in mithya, and then getting all excited and stressed out, trying to control one's experience. I do not have, the self, do not have this knowledge. And so I feel connected to the mind and jumping to the tunes of the mind. And throughout life, I'm trying to satisfy the unsatisfiable mind. It's all because I have bounded with the mind out of sheer delusion. How nice, huh? The connection between consciousness, the real self, and the mind is called delusion-born bondage. How nice, how amazing, huh? So what is the connection between consciousness and the mind? Or if there is really a connection, we know that there is no connection, And here the author says, that the delusion here is a delusion bound or created by delusion, delusion, the connection or the association, Let me read it according to its words, because it's very beautiful. If I do not have this knowledge, and so I feel connected with the mind. I feel that I am the mind, and I jump to the tunes of the mind. And throughout life, I'm trying to satisfy this, this unsatisfiable mind. And this is all because I have bounded myself to the mind out of sheer delusion. So if there is an association between consciousness, and the mind, it's just a delusion, I have attached myself to my mind out of sheer delusion. Delusion is something that you believe to be real, but it's absolutely unreal. So it is about that. This is a nice passage. We're gonna begin next week from here again. And then we're going to move. I mean, it's very little, but it's already late. And then we're going to move into the next verse 9. Okie dokie. Anything? Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, my friends. So we meet again next Monday with Panchadas, Ishvara willing, of course. Take care, much love. Bye-bye.
Thank you.